Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is David Wellman, and it is my honor to act as the director of the Gray School of Applied Diplomacy at DePaul University. On behalf of our colleagues and our students, I am very pleased to welcome you to our conference, Environmental Diplomacy, Exploring Transprofessional Contributions to Global Survival. Over the next 3 days, we will be hearing from both practitioners and scholars of diplomacy who come to the table from multiple vocations in the name of addressing the role of diplomacy in engaging the environmental crisis. As we approach the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, the role of state-sponsored diplomacy in efforts to move in the direction of a more sustainable world is at the forefront of many people's minds regarding diplomatic efforts, and rightly so. For without significant movement on the part of nation states, through not only acknowledging, but physically adopting and living out new standards and practices, the goal of avoiding catastrophic levels of global warming will never be realized. At the same time, however, it must be stated that state-sponsored diplomacy alone will never realize the requirements for achieving environmental sustainability. For this will only be achieved through simultaneous commitments lived out by communities at the sub-state and grassroots levels as well. Thus, as we look upon a world struggling with increasing inequalities and factionalizations, we can see that a meaningful response to the environmental crisis will demand a level of cooperation and collaboration across all levels of human society on a scale never before seen in human history. For many, the prospect of turning toward rather than away from what we are facing is an unattractive proposition. For in truth, denial of what is ecologically unfolding is not simply a polemical position. It is a position wittingly or unwittingly embraced by anyone who is capable of making a difference, but who refuses to act. This is a world in which diplomacy matters now more than ever, not only because of its potential to enact political transformation, but by virtue of its potential to invite people-to-people communication and collaboration, which is socially, economically, philosophically, and even spiritually transformative. In this regard, the importance of what Kostas Konstantinou and others call everyday diplomacy, practiced by average people on the ground, is clearer now than ever. Given that we cannot discuss our ecological realities without engaging the subject of the land our university sits upon, we would like to note that at DePaul University, we acknowledge that we live and work on traditional native lands that are home to well over 100 different tribal nations. We extend our respect to all of them, including the Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Odawa nations, who signed the Treaty of Chicago in 1821 and 1833. We also recognize the Ho-Chunk, Miamia, Menominee, Illinois Confederacy, and Peoria people, who also maintain relationships with this land. When we say we respect the indigenous nations whose land our university sits upon, we must match our words with action. Honoring the earth these nations preserved and those who arrived later have ecologically undermined requires real work now and future actions which demonstrate that we are taking responsibility for what many and dominant cultures have thus far failed to acknowledge. The mission of the Gray School is to train future practitioners of diplomacy across all vocations, from those pursuing careers in the Foreign Service to those who want to build bridges as NGO leaders, private sector actors, scientists, artists, educators, religious leaders, community organizers, and activists. Our goal is to create diverse cohorts of students with a wide range of vocational trajectories who engage the study and practice of diplomacy together, and in so doing, establish networks that they will take with them as they pursue or redirect their respective careers to the work of bridge building upon graduation. Examining the transprofessional diplomatic work which is currently taking place and which must now be amplified in the name of supporting environmental sustainability is the theme of our conference. This is only one small dimension of the work that must be done, but it is our work, and we are so grateful to everyone who has gathered here today to join us in these efforts. To this end, we would like to invite everyone who joins us for this conference to consider themselves part of our global Gray School cohort. We are so grateful for the opportunity to learn from you and with you, and we look forward to doing so long into the future. I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the extraordinary team of people who made this conference possible. This includes Noi Cornago, the noted scholar of diplomacy, and my dear colleague from the University of the Basque Country, who helped conceive of this conference and who played a leading role in identifying our speakers, I would also like to express my profound gratitude and thanks to Geoffrey Wiseman, the Gray School's inaugural endowed chair in applied diplomacy. Jeff has lent his time and wisdom to the creation and execution of this conference in so many ways, and I'm so proud to be able to call him my colleague. I would also like to thank Leah Hasdan for all her advanced work on logistics of this conference, and our extraordinary IT team, Jessica Bishop-Royce and Reina Nomura. There would be no conference in the absence of this generous and tireless group of people. Finally, I would like to give my greatest thanks to our students, whose energy, creativity, and enthusiasm for working as bridge builders in our world is the real reason all of us are here today. So now, let us therefore turn to our first speaker for today, Leila Nicolas, who will be giving a talk entitled An Introduction to Environmental Diplomacy, followed by a response by Geoffrey Wiseman. Leila Nicolas is Professor of International Relations at Lebanese University and the Command and Staff Academy and the Center of Research and Strategic Studies of the Lebanese Army, Beirut. She is both a scholar and a practitioner of diplomacy. Professor Nicolas is the founder of the NGO Lebanese for Democracy and Good Governance. She has 21 years of civil society experience in conflict resolution, peace building, justice, and rule of law. Her research interests include great power politics and grand strategies, transitional justice, security and conflicts, and the broader Middle East. Professor Nicolas is a member of the advisory board of the Academy of Transformation at Oxford University and the Academic Council on the United Nations System. She is the author or co-author of 10 books, including with Eli Kalab, Effective Forms of Environmental Diplomacy, published by Routledge this year in 2021. Professor Nicolas joins us today from Beirut. Welcome to you, Leila.
Thank you so much. Thank you, David. Thank you for all. Thank you for hosting me in this important conference. I'm honored to be with you. I want to greet you all. I should say good morning, Chicago. It's here afternoon in Lebanon, so I will use the greeting, a nice greeting we use in Lebanon. You can use it at day, at night, at any time. It's marhaba. Marhaba, we use it as hello, but it backs to ancient language here in the Levant, which means God is love. So greetings to you all, marhaba. When I was about to write my book, Effective Forms of Environmental Diplomacy, I was concerned about the future of the conflicts in the world. Mainly, we forecast the most conflicts in the world will not be geopolitical, but will be environmental. This idea get me along with all these stressful conditions here in the Middle East, with all these great powers politics. So I thought that we should think about a new strategies to conflict resolutions. I believe in diplomacy. I believe in non-violent conflict resolution strategies. So I believe that if the main conflicts in the future will be environmental, so we need an environmental diplomacy to overcome all these challenges. So I'm supposed to make an introduction to environmental diplomacy. Excuse me, I will share my screen with you. In trying to map the issue of environmental diplomacy, I will address three main questions. Why environmental diplomacy? Where are we now? And how to move forward? Why environmental diplomacy? On the state level, diplomacy in early traditional state sense focused just only on the high politics, which means the national security, the sovereignty, and the defense. It was not until the states recognized that the environment can be a national security threat that they moved it to deal it with the diplomacy. Before that, states did not weigh much what was considered law politics, which means social, cultural, and environmental politics, which is our case now. So what causes an environmental conflict? There are many narratives for this environmental conflicts. The first narrative, natural resource scarcity. Instability can be caused by decrease in supply and increase in demand, and also in the people's inability to access key resources. The second narrative is the population growth. In addition to poor economic performance and lack of adequate infrastructure, population growth may cause conflict and instability. If I want to give an example from the MENA region, most of the researchers think that the youth bulb is one of the main factors that raised the revolution in the Arab Spring, which started in 2010 and 2011. The third narrative is the human migration. Once people are forced to migrate due to lack of opportunities, due to lack of resources, they tend to migrate to another places, and then conflicts will arise because there will be scarcity of resources. There will be this identity issue, and most of the times the host communities and the migrants or the refugees will be in a stressful condition, and this will lead to a conflict. If I want to give a clear example from Lebanon, I can give here in Lebanon, in the most poorest areas in Lebanon, Bekaa and Akkar, they host the most of the Syrian refugees. So tensions arose before that because there are lack of resources and tensions between the host communities, which are people in Lebanon are under poverty line, and their guests also are under poverty lines, and they are sharing the same scarce resources. The fourth narrative is the globalization. This narrative is related to the food security. The globalization allowed mass production and distribution at the expense of the environment, as you all know. The fifth narrative is the unequal resource distribution. When communities experience insecurity due to environmental degradation, the disadvantaged members of the society will suffer the most, and this will lead to violence and instability in a society. Here I want to give an empirical case from the Middle East also. If I want to draw the strongest case in the Middle East that links the environment with the conflict, I will refer to the Syrian civil war, which started in 2011. An extreme drought in Syria between 2006 and 2009, which was most likely due to climate change, was one factor in the violent uprising in 2011. In addition to Iraqi migration and influx of refugees to Syria, as you know, the Iraqis, after the 2003, the Iraqis migrated to Syria, mostly to Syria and to Lebanon, and then most of those Iraqis in Lebanon went to Europe. But Iraqi inhabitants stayed in Syria, and they had worked there, and they competed. They competed with the Syrians with the scarce resources also. So this migration, in addition to the internal migration of Syrian migrations from rural places to cities, led to high unemployment rates, pressure on infrastructures, and resource scarcities. These were also main causes for the Syrian civil war. If I want to add also the population growth, the unequal resource distributions, lack of resources, and the Syrian inability to access resources due to corruption, clientelism, sectarianism, and the dictatorship were also leading factors. So if we take this empirical case and we take also the theoretical researches that have been done, we feel that nowadays environmental diplomacy should be seen as a peace building tool. I want to make a SWOT analysis. Where are we now? Now we are in a level of transformation. After the end of the Cold War, diplomacy has witnessed a huge transformation. The role of technology and media changed the image and the role of the diplomat. It reinforced public diplomacy. in addition to the emergence of new state actors as the NGOs and even the multinational corporations. Here, the civil society have made a huge impact on at the environmental level. Multilateral diplomacy, pressed by public opinion, pushed the environmental agenda forward. If the diplomacy was like at the traditional phase, it was like just a state issue, the environment would not have developed in the field of diplomacy like it's now. So now environmental diplomacy is under two categories: the conventions regulating natural resources and the conventions regulating pollution. So I will go here to make just a SWOT analysis. If we want to make a SWOT analysis for the environmental diplomacy nowadays, we have the bright side and we have the challenges and dilemmas. On the bright side, we have a huge progress in the international environmental law and its principles. Mainly, these principles are found in the Stockholm Declaration and the Rio Declaration 1992. So most these principles are found, and although states are not fully compliant with them, but they are very important in the treaty law and in the customary law. A sovereign shall make no harm, the duty to prevent, the principle of cooperation, the principle of sustainable development, the precautionary principle, the polluters pay principle, the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. More on the bright side, multilateralism pushed the agenda forward more than ever. The NGOs played an important role locally and internationally in addressing different environmental issues. Since 1980s, these organizations have increasingly pushed the environmental agenda forward. Multilateral diplomacy nowadays helps to facilitate cooperation and coordination between different stakeholders at the international and national levels, and between the civil societies, public and private sectors. Also on the bright side, we have at the state level more decentralization, which leads to better governance. Nowadays, we see that decision-making powers at the state level have been more decentralized, shifting from the governments toward more participation of the civil society, local institutions, and NGOs. In the environmental governance realm, this power shift helped promote the fundamental principles of environmental governance and enhanced effectiveness. Also on the bright side, we see that the environment nowadays became an essential part of at diverse decision-making levels, which resulted from the understanding that the cities and communities, as well as economic, social, and political lives, are all subsets of the environment, and people belong to the ecosystem in which they thrive. Number 5, also at the bright side, environment is becoming more and more part of policy priority areas. This will be the major issue on the international scene after the COVID-19. We will see that the most notable policy priorities will deal with the effect of the environment on the quality of lives of the people, and the ability to use the environment in the economy, in the Greek economy, which will lead to better quality of life for the people nationally and internationally. Now we go to the not most the bright side, but the challenges and dilemmas. Here we say that the state's national interests are still very important, mainly when even though the progress have been made in the environmental preservation due to the progress in the international environmental law and its principles, the main problem now is still till now that the state's national boundaries are not the same as the environmental and natural boundaries, and mainly this affects the compliance and of the states with the environmental laws and principles. Also, we have this dilemma, which I don't think mainly that it will go easily from the academic and the practical field, the economic growth versus the environmental stability. We all know that the economy and the environment are interconnected. Environmental diplomacy will not succeed without considering economic interests. Besides, economic diplomacy will not be sustainable unless it addresses the environmental issues. However, this relationship between these two topics makes asymmetrical perceptions between the global south and the global north. While most of the sustainability discourses in the industrialized countries in the north, in the global north, refer to environmental issues, developing countries are still evolving around their economic and social problems, such as poverty, social injustices, and lack of development. I don't think that this challenge and this dilemma will be easily solved in the meantime. The third thing in the challenges we have nowadays is the rise of populism. The rise of populism, especially the right-wing populism, we witness this wave of rise of populism since 2016 and onwards. This wave of populism is accompanied by the spread of conspiracy theories and the rise of climate change denial theories. This coincided with the lobbying against the green policies. From 1989 onwards, the industry-funded organizations sought to spread about a doubt among the public about global warming, which increases the denial of the global warming, the retrieving from the multilateral environmental treaties and so on. On the fourth challenge we have, the division at home is leading to weak state negotiators. Driven by voters' interests at home, many politicians and world leaders are still reluctant to consider the environment as essential to high politics and to take into consideration that the environment is a real threat to national security. Usually, internal conflicts over economic versus environmental policies cause disturbance in states' negotiating power, and usually it weakens the diplomats of the state and gives advantage to the anti-environment politics. The fifth title in this challenges the coalition buildings, which is the double-edged sword. As you know, the coalition building has a great effect on the advance of the environment, on the international agenda and international treaties. Despite not having an official status, coalitions between states and NGOs facilitated coordination, advocacy, and led to successful environmental negotiations. We can, if we want to refer it to the diplomacy, coalition building is a form of associative diplomacy that serves to increase the group members' bargaining strength and their ability to lobby their causes. But here I want to raise a question or a dilemma. If in an environmental coalition, there is a state which is very powerful, which is giving more and more resources than the others. So this powerful state shall lead the coalition to its interests. Does this interest benefit the global agenda, environmental agenda, or the national interest of the state? This is the main dilemma that we will face. At the sixth and the final challenge we face now, the NGO diplomacy. At the NGO diplomacy is the AstroTurf. As you know, the NGO diplomacy facilitated the international treaties, facilitated the advance of environment in the international law, and has a huge impact on the international environmental international agenda worldwide since the end of the Cold War till now. But we know that the NGOs, theoretically, the NGOs are independent of governmental institutions, but usually they rely on funds to carry on their missions. Some NGOs receive millions of dollars funds from states. This may raise questions about their level of independence. I want to quote Transparency International here. I quote, Transparency International says that the NGO status risks to become a more vehicle used by special interest groups to avoid control mechanisms, end quote. And others also have raised the problem of AstroTurf, which is the process by which some firms create mobilizations that take the form of an NGO, resemble an NGO, but whose existence, in fact, is provided by private funds for commercial purposes. This is a challenge that we should face dealing with the NGO diplomacy. So now I will move to the third question in my speech: how to move forward from now on. My first recommendation is to train expert diplomats. Today, in a complex, interdependent world, diplomacy is facing many challenges that require better practice. It must realize that the urgency either to develop or perish. Today, it's essential to move towards more professionalism, to have expert diplomats. How can we define expert diplomats? Expert diplomats are professionals with advanced scientific training and are authorized to make politically or legally binding decisions. My second recommendation: make or provide interdisciplinary training. Building a team of expert diplomats and negotiators from various backgrounds helps to better facilitate conflict resolution strategies, because they can think out of the box, because they have many diverse backgrounds. They can think more positively, and they can add more ideas to the table. A consistent interdisciplinary training program for diplomats should provide them with extensive knowledge and position and reinforce their expertise in scientific knowledge. Here I suggest that this training for diplomats should go both ways, providing scientific knowledge to political negotiators and diplomats, and provide political knowledge and negotiation skills to scientific experts. My third recommendation is construct scientific political negotiators. The notion of scientific expertise should not omit the political nature of international negotiations. In other words, governments should train expert diplomats, not just to act upon their scientific knowledge only, but also upon their political and diplomatic understanding. What is needed is not just using technical and scientific experts to work beside the political negotiators or to be in the pre-negotiation phase, not just that, but to empower environmental expert diplomats and train them to engage in all the phases of negotiations actively. My fourth recommendation: build an environmental diplomat career. The urgency of protecting the environment makes us push for establishing an environmental diplomat as a career. An environmental diplomat should speak with an expert and a political voice at once. They should approach any environmental issue with a globalist perception. This career should not be linked to social and political construction in which the diplomatic factor is this career should not replace the diplomatic factor, but it should complement the work of other diplomatic agents. Environmental diplomats should protect their national states' interests, yes, for sure, but they should look beyond it to foresee environmental topics as convergent ideas that touch the whole universe and affect all. On a general final note, I urge scholars and practitioners in the field of diplomacy, international relations, and political science to move beyond the traditional perceptions, theories, and understanding of their fields. Why? because environment has been the main question and will be the main question in various fields of these fields. At the global level, nature is becoming the source of both cooperation and conflict, which imposes a new vision for the future of the planet. Also, states are more aware of the new challenges caused by environmental degradation on the national, regional, and the global level. Environment is becoming the main issue for voters' choices more and more. And as you see now in most of the world, German elections, politicians are more to offer green policies and as promises and solutions for the economic problems and social problems internally. Environment has become one of the main sources of economic power nationally and globally. Nowadays, states are looking for more investments in green economy and foresee solutions for their unemployment problems. At the international relations level, the theories are moving away from traditional concept of security and conflicts. And now we forecast that the main root causes of future conflicts will be mainly environmental. That's why I also say that environmental diplomacy should be seen as a main issue and not just for peace building, but on the theoretical and the practical level, it will enhance our societies and it will enhance our living in the nature and at the global level. Thank you so much.
Much for so clearly mapping out so many of the categories of analysis and the diplomatic challenges laid before us by the environmental crisis. And I look forward to many of our panelists and commentators taking a number of the strands that you have identified and weaving those into our conversations throughout the next 3 days. So on that theme of response and moving our conversation forward, I would now like to introduce Geoffrey Wiseman, who is going to provide a response to Leila's address. Geoffrey Wiseman is professor and inaugural endowed chair in applied diplomacy at the Gray School of Applied Diplomacy at DePaul University. Jeff is a former Australian diplomat who served in Stockholm, Hanoi, and Brussels, and as advisor to the Australian Foreign Minister, Gareth Evans. Jeff has also worked in the Strategic Planning Unit of the Executive Office of the United Nations Secretary General and as a Peace and Security Program Officer at the Ford Foundation. He has held academic positions at the University of Southern California and most recently at the Australian National University, where he was the director of the Asia Pacific College of Diplomacy. He is the author or editor of multiple volumes on diplomatic studies, including Isolate or Engage, Adversarial States, U.S. Foreign Policy and Public Diplomacy, published by Stanford University Press in 2015, and is the co-editor with Pauline Kerr of Diplomacy in the Globalizing World, Theories and Practices, published by Oxford in 2018. Welcome to you, Jeff.
Thanks so much, David. And hello, Leila. It's so nice to meet you. David, in your remarks earlier, you basically made the argument that state-sponsored diplomacy alone will never realize the requirements for achieving environmental sustainability. This will only really be achieved through simultaneous commitments, was your language, lived out by communities at the sub-state and the grassroots level as well. Now, this kind of normative claim that David made, I would guess, and I say this with some trepidation, since I note that Kostas Konstantinou and Noé Konago are with us today, but in Kostas's and Noé's work with Fiona McConnell in 2016, they made the very important argument that the pluralization of diplomatic actors and diplomatic cultures is transforming contemporary diplomacy. And that this new form of diplomacy, or new forms of diplomacy, I should stress, goes beyond the officially accredited representatives of professional diplomats representing states. So this includes the idea that I think Kostas, Noé, and Fiona coined of trans-professional diplomatic practices. Now, their view, I think, highlights what I think are the new skills and the new knowledges that non-state actors actually bring to the diplomatic realm. Now, as I read Leila's terrific book and as I listened to her presentation today, I tried to identify trans-professional ideas and practices in her account of environmental diplomacy. And I would say that there is a great deal of resonance between Leila's work and Costas's, Noé's and Fiona's. Now, let me just give you a few examples of the things that sort of seem to ring true for me. So in Leila's account of the evolution of international environmental law, which is a fairly, I'm going to say, explicit disciplinary approach to environmental problems, I still note an impressive pluralization of actors. And so just here are a few examples to give you an idea of the universe that I think that she sees. First of all, this is the United Nations as an international organization. She talks about UN Secretary Generals, especially the effective ones, such as Kofi Annan. She mentions the UN's many agencies and programs, notably the UN Environment Programme with its headquarters in Nairobi, Kenya. And she mentions all of these agencies and programs all the way through to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, an extraordinary non-state entity, if you like, that I think is worthy of very, very close study as an important environmental non-state, if you like, actor. Then Leila also mentions quite a lot of good countries, and she particularly points out Sweden. Sweden and the way that it created the landmark Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment in 1972. This really was a major event, and it came about through a state. And I think to pick up on the point that here is a country that is able, not perfectly, I have worked in Sweden, so I know it's far from perfect, but it is able to find a decent balance between, I think, Leila's argument that countries, sovereign states, need to be able to balance their own national interests with the interests of the global system as a whole. And I think she makes this point very, very nicely. Then beyond the good country, such as Sweden, you also have the good international citizen. And here again, I mention or refer to someone that Leila talks about, Gro Harlem Brundtland, the former Prime Minister of Norway, who managed the Brundtland Report, Our Common Future. Now, I stress that this was the work of a blue ribbon international commission of notable international policy makers. And then at the other end of this generational spectrum, and maybe the influence spectrum, if you like, is Greta Thunberg. So let's add her to the mix of the good international citizen that I think Leila is bringing to our attention. And then, of course, she does refer often to global civil society in various forms. So that she mentions the growing civil society participation that was most famously, I suppose, noted at the Rio Earth Summit of 1992. And of course, a lot has happened since then. That Rio Summit brought together the UN as an international organization, member states, and literally thousands of NGOs and activist representatives. So the good news here is the pluralization of actors. Now, the problem that I think Leila is all too aware of, and she alerted us to this, is that many people don't see linear progress in terms of actor engagement or problems resolved. Now, the most likely explanation for this waxing and waning of interest is the nation state guarding what Jacques Derrida called their phantasm of indivisible sovereignty. Sovereignty is something they do not, on the whole, want to let go of. And so that this general pattern persisted in climate change discussions. And I think it's been the member states of the UN or individual sovereign states have really dominated international negotiations by growing and basically not always listening to, let's say, non-state concerns and their expressions of inadequate action not being taken. I didn't express that clearly, but I think you get the idea. Now, overall, I think Leila argues cautiously that while environmental NGOs have been relatively successful, and there have been successes, she mentioned several of them, their effects, they've been quite successful in monitoring of international environmental legal regulations and conventions, Leila, to use your dichotomy. They haven't had universally successful outcomes, if you like, on compliance and enforcement. And I think the language you used in your book is that the influence here has been limited or has remained limited. Now, what I also noticed from the book, Leila, is that you gave a more optimistic account of environmental policy in the European Union. Now, clearly the picture there is more promising and decidedly more trans-professional, if you like. So that in Brussels and in EU capitals, the actors are many and varied. And we know many or most of them. The European Union Commission, the European Parliament with its many members, politicians. We are aware of the member state diplomats, and we read quite a bit about them, advocacy coalitions, lobby groups, and of course, the all-powerful private sector companies as well. Now, I think there, Leila, this does lead me to ask the big questions, and I hope that we can come back to these during the course of our 3 days. But I think the first question that I raised, and I'm going to just mention 5 here. The very first one, is the European Union unique? In other words, to what extent are these trans-professional dynamics discernible in other parts of the world and in other contexts? So that to me is the first question. The second one is, does a trans-professional lens help bridge the gap between states and non-state actors, between cities and rural communities, and between all of the other fault lines, many of which you mentioned, in society? A third question I want to put on the table for our conference is, will the trans-professional lens guide us to make these very difficult decisions, dilemmas, as you put them, on global environmental priorities? How do we decide between where we put our weight, our attention, our energy, between climate change, quality of life, biodiversity, waste management? These priorities are mentioned, are listed in your book, but I think my own view is that a trans-professional lens, the combination of multiple plural actors looking at this problem, can help us make decisions, better decisions, I should say, about what the priorities should be. And so a second last question is, will the state-based diplomats, and I was one of them once, will they accept or will they resist global power sharing that is implicit in the trans-professional thinking and practice? And again, here I paraphrase my good colleague David Wellman, who constantly asks this question: what are the requirements for successfully promoting more cooperation among all diplomatic actors? And David would count non-state participants as diplomatic actors, not just sovereign state ones. What are the requirements for successfully promoting this cooperation on all levels? And there are many levels in ways that help us address better the staggering scope of the ecological crises that we currently face. So I look forward to your thoughts. I look forward to the thoughts of all of our participants as we explore the trans-professional underpinnings of environmental diplomacy over the next 2 or 3 days. And allow me, Leila, to thank you so much for setting up our explorations so well. Thank you so much. Back to you, David.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And I just want to thank both of our speakers, most particularly Leila, Nicolas, for your wonderful talk and for joining us this morning and getting us started. So thank you, Leila from Beirut and Jeff from Chicago. And now we're going to take a break and we're going to come back at the top of the hour with our next panel entitled Diplomacy, Migration, and Vulnerability. We look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Leila.
Thanks.